Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim White. I'm the chair of the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust, and I'm going to welcome you tonight to our public forum on the Hingham Housing Plan as part of our master plan in town. Before we get into the program, I'd like to recognize a few folks that have come down to see us, and Tom Mayo, our leader here in town.
He's the leader.
Yeah. Our Selectman Joe Fisher, also a member of our trust. Mary Savage Dunham, one of our planning people. Emily Wentworth, another one of our great planning people and great coordinator with us. Her new assistant, Nicole. Now, Donna, are you still on advisory or CPC? You're always on something.
I graduated.
Graduated. Good for you. Good for you. Let's see, who else do we have here? Jerry Seelman. Another one who's been on more committees in town than you can shake a stick at, so I'm not going to guess at what you're on now. Daveline Cooper, who is a representative from advisory, liaison to advisory, and then see if we have anybody else. And our guidance here and our consultant, Karen Sonnenberg. You'll be hearing from her in just a couple of minutes. Megan Burr from the Housing Authority. Terrific. Hopefully you can stay for the balance of the meeting too, Megan, because we'd like to have a little further conversations with the Housing Authority as well. So, and then we have all of our trust members. Anita Comerford in the back. Greg Waxman, I saw you here. Mike McDonald. Who else do we have? Our newest member, Amy Farrell. And Nancy Kerber and Kathy Amonte. I'm going to go Nancy Kerber and Kathy Amonte. So welcome everybody. And if you didn't get named, just come up later on. We'll make sure we identify you and get you a minute of the 15 seconds of fame. So before we get into the program, I just want to talk just real briefly about the trust in town that we have been in existence now since 2007. It was actually came into existence almost right after the Massachusetts legislature passed the statute to authorize the towns to utilize housing trusts to help them support affordable housing. It's a credit to our town that we were one of the first communities to adopt at a town meeting and pass the resolution to have the trust created. And I think that over the last now 12 years, my goodness, the trust has really grown in what it has taken on as far as not only maintaining the affordable housing that's in place, but creating new units. And for a couple of examples of those that we have going on right now, we are in the process of trying to create two additional units of affordable housing up at Whiting Street in a partnership with the Habitat for Humanity. Whiting Street, I was right. Yeah, there we go. And we have two more we're working on up at Cushing Street. We purchased that property on Cushing Street last year, and we now have a consultant working with us to see if we can't subdivide it and create a second unit. And most recently, we purchased a two-family on Road Circle, which we have plans to do some rather significant renovations for which, with the assistance of Emily, we have put a request in for a grant from the state, and we are optimistic that we will soon hear that we were successful in our application because it was done so beautifully. And once we get that, they will make the renovations and likely condominiumize those two units and then advertise them as affordable units to add to our inventory. And in addition, we still have down on Beale Street the Selectmen's parcel, which with Megan Burr here, we know that the Housing Authority has a parcel down there that we need to do some work on as well, and perhaps we can do something in a partnership with them going forward. So we have a lot of things going on for a volunteer committee, and I've said this before, and I say it when they're here and more often when they're not here, that they are the most outstanding people that work together for the town that I've ever encountered. They were really great volunteers with the diverse backgrounds. We have lawyers, we have builders, we have architects, but now we have a banker, thank God. And that work together, and they work together for the town, and it's all volunteers. So with that, I would like at this point ask Karen to come up, and this is our second public forum on the housing plan. We're trying to obviously get the community input as well as to the direction that we take going forward. And with Karen's assistance, we've done a significant amount of research on what the needs are and what the opportunities are to go forward. So without any further ado, Karen.
Oh, where's my presentation?
You need your notes?
They're handy at times, you know. Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you all for being here tonight. Should mention this is also on cable access, so that more folks from the town will be able to see the presentation and have avenues to weigh in. Really looking forward to comments and questions on the draft presentation, which we're trying to kind of take the key components and highlight them to tell you where we are so far in this housing plan. And it's a work in progress. And looking forward to further inputs so we can get closer to finalizing the draft. As Tim mentioned, this is the second public meeting. We had one in May. That one focused on the housing needs assessment, which is a pretty comprehensive and detailed document that summarizes a whole range of community characteristics and trends. Tonight's meeting is going to focus more on the housing strategies that came from that earlier component. However, we're going to just very, very briefly revisit some of the information that we presented in the May meeting. Such as kind of the definition of affordable housing. There are different definitions. The federal definition through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, whether it be for ownership or rental, you're living in housing that's not affordable to you. The definition we typically hear about and use is the one that's under the Chapter 40B comprehensive permit law, which states that if a unit's going to count towards what's called the subsidized housing inventory, those units that have been defined and accepted as the state as affordable, the unit has to meet a number of characteristics. One, it has to be affordable to those earning at or below 80% of area median income. These income limits are adjusted annually by HUD and adjusted by household size. An example is for a single-person household based on the 2019 income limits, the most that you can make is $62,450, that's single person. The average household size in Hingham is 3 people about, and that would involve an income limit of $80,300. We're talking about working people. Another requirement is the unit has to be permanent, and it has to be subsidized or approved by a subsidizing agency. So it has to have a direct subsidy of local, state, federal funding, or, as in the case of comprehensive permits, it has to get the go-ahead from a subsidizing agency such as Mass Housing Partnership, DHCD, et cetera, before the developer can submit a comprehensive permit application to the zoning board. Also has to be deed restricted. So the affordability requirements continue for long periods of time, and we're moving increasingly towards in perpetuity. And have to be affirmatively marketed. Outside, you can market within the community, of course, but notification has to also be given to those who might normally not hear about the housing opportunity if there wasn't some significant outreach process. Should also mention that a number of developments, including 40Bs, have what's called local preference, where up to 70% of the affordable units can be reserved for those who live or work in the community. So where is Hingham with respect to this subsidized housing inventory? Those affordable units that the state has accepted as affordable, what we refer to as the capital A affordable units. Currently, the town has 1,005 units as part of the subsidized housing inventory, which is equivalent of an uncontested 11.37% of the town's year-round housing stock, which, based on the 2010 census, is 8,841 units. Of those 1,005 units, 349 units are actually affordable, or that's equivalent to about 35% of the SHI units, because in 40B developments, there was an incentive for communities to build multifamily rental units. So in that case, all the units in a 40B rental development count towards the SHI, whereas in ownership projects, only the actual affordable ones count. The town is currently 121 units over that 10% affordability goal from the state. And we've calculated that when the 2020 census figures are released, which will increase that year-round housing unit count, the town should still be over that 10% threshold, plus around 30 units. So this is just really key takeaways from the housing needs assessment about important trends. One, and this is probably no surprise to anybody, but Hingham has an aging population. And that's driven largely by the baby boomers, but also by the type of development. Linden Ponds has attracted a considerable number of older residents, and that has been part of this increasing population. Those 65 years of age and older grew by 77% between 2000 and 2017, compared to a 16% overall population increase. Projections include that those 65 and plus are likely to grow from about 21% of the population in 2010 to about at least 31%, according to population projections through 2030. Projected declines in children and middle-aged residents, those under 20 are projected to increase from 26% or decrease from 26% of all residents to about 23% between 2010 and 2030. And an example of another example is those 45 to 54 are projected to decrease by almost 18% compared to an overall 5 to 7% population increase. Growth in smaller households. Just an example of those living alone in 2000, that was about 700 households, doubling by 2010 to more than 1,400 households, and according to the 2017 census estimates, increasing still more to about 1,551 households. Highly correlated with the number of folks who are aging, those 65 plus. Economic trends, relatively high median household income of $125,441. And just to give you some comparison, county median household income is a little over $82,000, and the state is a little over $74,000. Or there's some growing income disparities. For example, the median household income of homeowners increased by 19% between 2000 and 2017 to $152,674, while the median renter household income decreased by 3% to $48,284. So the median household income of homeowners is about 3 times that of renters. Also, just to give you some other perspectives of some income disparities, households earning more than $200,000 increased from 12% to 31% during that time period, 2000-2017. And households, very vulnerable households, earning less than $15,000, according to census estimates, supposedly increased as well, still low, 5.7% to 7%. With regard to housing, there has been some considerable housing growth, higher than population growth. The growth between 2000 and 2017 for housing was 24% compared to that 16% overall population growth, reflecting more smaller households. And also, there's a substantial amount of demo replacement activity. About 40% of all the new single-family homes that are being built involve tear-down activity. Predominance of ownership units, owner-occupied units, 80% of the housing stock, with, according to the census, a 0% vacancy rate, which doesn't even accommodate natural turnover, really. But on the other side, with rentals, there has been an increase in rentals from 14% of all housing units in 2000 to 20% in 2017, reflecting greater housing diversity and some progress in providing more housing options for residents. And there have been some significant projects that have helped increase that inventory, including the Shipyard, Linden Ponds, Lincoln School, et cetera. Just looking a bit at housing costs, there is very little affordability remaining in the private housing market. The census records indicate 122 single-family homes, and mostly condos, that are assessed at less than $200,000, and 137 units, again mostly condos, assessed between $200,000 and $300,000 that are still relatively affordable. Prices remain high. The median single-family home price as of the end of 2018 was $813,750 that would require an income of more than $187,000 to afford that price. That's based on spending no more than that 30% of area median income, or 30% of income on housing costs, and 80% financing. Since September, the median single-family house price climbed only modestly to about $817,000. For condos, the median condo price as of the end of 2018 was $450,000. That would require, again, an income of about $110,700. More recently, as of the last report, as of September 2019, the median condo price spiked to $711,000. That would require income of about $170,000 based on our estimates. The increase largely based on some of the high-priced condos that are coming on the market. So with rising housing prices, it's not surprising that there are widening affordability gaps, the difference between what people can afford and what the housing prices, going housing prices. So for example, the affordability gap for a single-family house based on the median income earning household was $270,750. And that gap is over $135,000 when you're looking at that household, three-person household earning at 80% of the area median income limit. With widening affordability gaps, there are also, it's not surprising that more people are spending more and more of their income on housing costs. They're increasing cost burdens. It's 30% or about 2,500 households were spending too much on their housing, and that's based on spending, again, more than 30% of your income on housing costs, including 17% of all households, or 1,415 households who were what we call severely cost burdened, as they were spending more than half their income on housing costs. Additionally, when you look at the 80% of area median income folks, 80% and below, 2/3 had cost burdens, and 1,200, or more than half, had severe cost burdens. But Hingham has been making some real progress with respect to affordable housing. It's not complete surprise also that it is over that 10% affordability threshold. And the first one we list is the public-private partnerships to develop affordable housing. Tim talked a little bit about housing trust efforts, including their work on Whiting Street with Habitat for Humanity. In fact, the town has a history of working with Habitat for Humanity of the South Shore, including units on Central Street and Winona Way. Also, another example is entered into a development agreement with the developer of 230 Beale Street that for a development that will include 55 affordable rentals, but also some additional resources for the community, such as $1 million to help with school improvements, some transfer of property for public park purposes, and some parking and traffic improvements along Beale Street. Passed the Community Preservation Act, very important resource in support of affordable housing. As Tim mentioned, it established an affordable housing trust that provides some really important oversight on affordable housing issues, as well as a fund to help dedicate resources towards the support of affordable housing production and preservation. And that trust will have and has some dedicated staff that's important to make sure things get done according to requirements. It's also been a designated housing choice community, reflective of high housing production. The state basically awards the town this designation with the opportunity to have greater access to capital funding, other components for discretionary funds, as well as technical assistance funds, which is going to be helpful in the years ahead. The town is undertaking a comprehensive master plan, and a number from the master plan steering committee are here tonight. That'll be an important step forward in really trying to identify the town's housing agenda, housing agenda, and everything else with respect to the town's long-term viability and its agenda. It is also participating in what's called a Regional Housing Options Plan. MAPC is coordinating this project, includes several other nearby communities, to look into zoning that would encourage smaller housing types. Once again, talking about more housing diversity, more housing types to address kind of wider range of local housing needs. It has zoning for flexible residential development, which is meant to be smart growth, to cluster development, and to allow for open space preservation. And it has some, we've had some multi-unit development, larger capital A developments that have increased the SHI. It also has zoning for mixed uses. It has an accessory dwelling unit bylaw, all meant to help diversify the housing stock and housing choice. It also recently passed a mean-tested property tax exemption program that will relieve some of the tax burdens on qualifying homeowners in town. The town is in the process of preparing a home rule petition that will have to be receive state legislative approval, but all steps going really in the right direction. So we have prepared a package of housing strategies that came from the following sources: previous plans and studies, the housing needs assessment, interviews with key local and regional stakeholders, meetings with the Housing Trust and Working Group, as well as, very importantly, on the Community Housing Forum on May 15th. We looked at, strategies that are currently working or have worked in the past in Hingham, and we have identified models that have been effective in other communities to inform some of the recommendations that we have in the housing plan. And we have some targeted goals that came out of the housing needs assessment as well. We've divided the housing strategies in a number of major categories, and one being those strategies that help build the town's capacity to better promote housing, affordable housing. And what we heard repeatedly from the May 15th Housing Forum was the need to make community education on affordable housing a priority. And the strategy includes a number of suggested activities for consideration. An example would be special forums on local housing initiatives, as well as issues that might come up from time to time. Annual housing summit to update people on where the town is with respect to implementing the housing plan, other issues that arise, as well as to build greater communication among representatives of various town entities to hopefully move towards greater cooperation and collaboration. Use of public access television, the town's kind of enhanced website, and training for board and committee members, as well as dedicated staff, to keep people up to date on best practices, new regulations, et cetera. I mean, issues in affordable housing keep changing, and so it's important for there to be resources for people in the community to stay abreast of them. Secure, sustainable funding sources for the housing trust. So the town, once again, is lucky to have the CPA, and at least 10% of the allocation, CPA allocation, has to be dedicated to community housing. And based on the pie chart below, you see that exactly 10%, supposedly to date, has been allocated. Half of what's been allocated for historic preservation, about the same that has been allocated for recreation, and a third of what's been allocated for open space preservation. The plan suggests that, like other communities, that the town annually approve kind of an automatic award to the Housing Trust of the 10% minimum amount that needs to be allocated for community housing, and that there are opportunities for additional proposals for funding other affordable housing projects. Regional CPA appropriations. There have been communities that have kind of joined forces and provided CPA support for projects that they think residents of their community might benefit from, but are located in other communities. An example is the Cape Cod Village in Orleans, where a number of other communities contributed their CPA funds to the total of about $1 million to support a development for autistic adults. Grant funding, Tim already mentioned potential grant funding for the Housing Trust project on Rhodes Circle. Donations. The town has some history of donating property, such as Whiting Street, for example, but there are other donations that could be raised to support the Housing Trust. Fundraising, including, we give some examples of how other communities have done special events. They've done some annual appeals. Some have done like special pins that people buy. So there are examples how there might be ways to raise more money to support the Housing Trust. And I should also mention that, one of the zoning strategies is to adopt inclusionary zoning. And a number of communities have used payments in lieu of actual units to capitalize their housing trusts to be used for support of other affordable housing units and other projects. We've included a number of zoning recommendations, and believing that in order to pursue greater housing diversity in more areas, to allow more housing choices, will require greater flexibility in the zoning bylaw. It's important to be able to use zoning to guide development in appropriate locations and incentivize public benefits, including affordable housing. It's a really important tool. And the town has made some real progress in zoning, but we suggest that there may be some tweaking and some additional zoning amendments that can make sense. One is to expand the accessory dwelling unit zoning. Town, not too long ago, passed a zoning bylaw that would allow ADUs, which is a really important step forward, but they've limited the ADUs to occupancy of family members. The plan suggests that the town consider lifting that restriction to make it more adaptable to other homeowners, and importantly, provide a real income stream to those who have those really high cost burdens, particularly seniors who are really want to age in place but are having a hard time affording to do so. So there are some recommendations about fine-tuning the bylaw to make it a little bit more responsive to local needs. The plan also suggests amending the flexible residential development bylaw, once again recognizing that cluster zoning and having such a bylaw is smart, makes sense, but suggests that there are ways to make that bylaw more effective. Mixed-use zoning, too, there is some limited ability to do mixed residential, commercial, and business districts, but the plan suggests that the town look at ways to better encourage such development in, once again, in appropriate locations. Besides the downtown, train station's been mentioned, part of South Hingham has been mentioned, that really can add vitality to local areas and still include some amount of affordable housing. And consider inclusionary zoning. which means that any project of a certain size that has residential units, a certain portion of those units have to be affordable, eligible for counting on the subsidized housing inventory. And that, that zoning also include an option for a cash fee in lieu of actual units. However, that fee formula has to be, clearly defined so that you're getting the amount necessary to actually fully subsidize an affordable housing unit. And we've give a number of examples of other towns are doing it. Also to suggest density bonuses to make that inclusionary piece feasible. Explore cottage development. Once again, going back to the theme of allowing more housing types in more areas. Cottage development, smaller units clustered around a green space, little pocket neighborhoods have been very effective in other communities. We give a lot of examples, and Craftsman Village is an example of trying to do something like that. And the need, once again, to include some affordability in there. Certainly these units are great for empty nesters and as starter housing. And address tear-down activity. Once again, that 40% of all single-family homes involve demo replacement, replacing more modest houses with very large and expensive ones. Hingham's not the only one that's grappling with it. We give example how Wellesley has been dealing with it through their large house review process. So depending on the zoning district, if a project, a housing proposal is over a certain size, it goes through an extra review process, a design review process. Needham put together, and Needham, about 95% of all units involve demo replacement. And they formed a working group that studied the issue for several years, actually, researched it, what other communities were doing, really looked clearly at what the zoning impacts were having, and came up with zoning changes to really try to reduce what they consider the greatest kind of negative effects of massing and try to encourage more architectural features. It's hard with this microphone, but I'm just curious, people who are here, of those zoning recommendations, are there particular ones that you think make more sense and that should be kind of prioritized versus others? You want to go up to the microphone so people can hear you?
Yes, my name's Alan Peralta. I live at 39 Elm Street. I actually permitted the first flexible residential development, Hingham Ridgewood Crossing. So that was the first one was done. 31 detached units on 39 acres. So we had the whole green space thing. It was 55 and older. But I believe, and Emily or Mary can correct me, don't we need at least 5 acres for a flex now? 3 acres? Okay. I think at the time, has that been amended? I think it was higher. Okay. Well, that's step one. So I think a couple of ones that answer your question. I think accessory dwelling units without a restriction would be a major thing. I happen to run at Emily at Town Hall. I have 2 sons who live in California. California has a statewide ADU program. And they can either be detached, attached, or whatever, because, I mean, they have a cost of housing that's even higher than ours. But there's no restrictions to who it is. There is some local control as far as setbacks and things like that. So I think an unrestricted ADU is a really easy one. I know Tom Mayo and Joe can attest to that. Mary Power made a very good presentation as a selectman a few weeks ago. With the aging demographic, we have this, probably the average tax bill is $12,000 to $14,000 for those people. And even though they may have an income today of about $125,000, that household income is going to decrease significantly when they're down there getting what they're getting in Social Security. So you could well be spending 20% of what your income is just on your tax bill. So I think your point was well taken, that some of these houses, if they actually could have an ADU, very common in California. We go and visit our sons out there. 2 or 3 times we've actually stayed in buildings where there's an accessory unit. Not, because it provides that. I've actually seen cases where people actually go into the smaller unit and rent the bigger one out in order to make their money work.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good one. And maybe even, I look at the Old Ship Parish House as an example, which right now is like 2.8 acres, something like that, so it's under the flex. But on Elm Street, up the street from me, that 3-family that burned down, that Falconeri did over, I think that's probably on the most 9,000 square feet, and there's 3 units, each with a garage. Quite honestly, and I have no interest in that site, but would it be the end of the world if like 8 of those units 3 units existed on the Old Ship site, clustered in a way that you had some say in the planning and how it laid out? Because that's a location that would be attractive to people to still be near the downtown. And I think the town should also look at things like the Station Street parking lot. What if you put that out for development and require that a parking garage be there that could be used both by residents who are living there as well as people on Station Street? So those are as I went through the whole thing, those are the first things that came to mind.
Thank you, that's great. All right. Anybody else? We'll have time for comments at the end, but I thought at this point might break things up a little bit instead of me just talking at you. Yeah.
Megan Buer, 489 Main Street. I just want to say that the cottage idea really sort of struck me because that feels like sort of one of the few options that have sort of intergenerational living, which I think is important for vibrant communities, not just having sort of age segregated housing communities. Because I do think it's important to allow or to figure out ways that young people can buy into Hingham, and people who grew up here like myself can move back as young people. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to move on. We're getting close to the end anyway, so. So we do have some housing development strategies, and we've basically broken them up between publicly owned property and privately owned property. And just here, suitable tax title properties. The Housing Trust has in the past looked at tax title properties for the potential of being able to have those properties conveyed and then being able to develop them. The Lincoln School expansion has been discussed in the past, a way to kind of add on to that development. There are as Tim mentioned, there's several properties off of Beale Street that provide some opportunities. And there's also new opportunity potentially to acquire property and to develop it. One of the examples that we've heard was the Old Ship, and with a cluster around it. So, that's kind of right on with what we're hearing from other folks. And so, can we give examples other communities are doing at Carlisle and Falmouth, for example, both acquired parcels and developed housing on part of it, open space preservation, also included bonding of CPA money to make that possible, has been used in the past. And the continuing efforts of the Housing Trust to acquire those small infill sites that make a big difference to the people who are lucky enough to actually become their homeowners. Just some examples of private property options, looking at areas where there is existing infrastructure, and areas that have been suggested include the downtown. It's included the train station, areas of South Hingham, infill opportunities in existing neighborhoods where you can offer some diversity of housing types within the fabric of a neighborhood, without it can still be harmonious with the neighborhood housing. And then once again, South Hingham, Some suggestions about development opportunities include the A.W. Perryland, Bristol Brothers Properties, the Office Park, Industrial Park, where housing is not currently allowed, but some communities have been making progress in combining housing in these areas. I should mention that the plan also includes a number of resources, some that are fairly new, and models of how those resources are being used. An example is the Community Scale Housing Initiative that's meant for either ownership or rental for projects of less than 20 units. And there's the Workforce Housing Fund, where funding has been put in place to support units for households earning up to 120% of area median income who are still priced out of the local housing stock. And then there's a new pot of money to support down payment assistance, which will be helpful, hopefully. And then there's some references to housing preservation opportunities. Consider adaptive reuse. A good example of that is the conversion of the Lincoln School into senior housing. Looking at other properties that are currently non-residential but that could be converted to residential use, including some amount of affordable housing. To monitor compliance with affordability requirements, it takes so much work to get those capital A affordable units on the SHI. You just want to make diligent that you don't lose any, and that the affordability requirements are being regularly monitored. And if it means monitoring the monitors, you need to do that. And introduce a small grant repair program. There are numbers of communities that have created programs that support small health and safety modification with grants of typically about $5,000 that should be considered as a potential support for some homeowners that are finding it difficult to afford to do very basic but important modifications to their homes, and particularly given an aging population, some home modifications for special needs. And to connect qualifying residents to other housing rehab initiatives. There are programs and services that are out there, and it's important for people to know that they exist, and if they can, to have the ability to apply for them. And they include such things as a state septic repair program, a Get the Lead Out program, a home modification loan program, and other kind of housing improvement initiatives. So to end, at this point, we'd like to hear from you, any questions that you have, any comments that you'd like to add. As I mentioned, this is a work in progress. We're going to be sharpening our pencils further and making changes based on what we're hearing. Those folks who aren't here tonight but see the presentation on cable access, we will once again be putting the draft on the town's website, and there will still be an opportunity for folks to provide comments, their comments on the draft. So with that, anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to add at this point? That's all right.
So a couple things that Karen raised, that just to remind you folks, as we're holding these public forums, we are interested in your input. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from the town. Every year, our trust goes to the town, goes to the Community Preservation Committee, and we ask for affordable housing funds. Every year, the Community Preservation Committee does us right. I mean, we put a request in and we receive funding, and it's your money. It's your money that's coming to us, and we're looking for guidance on how you want us to spend it. These are the facts that Karen has put there, the aging of our community, the fact that there are significant numbers of folks who are overhoused and aren't in a position they're paying significantly more than 30% of their income on their housing. That there are opportunities that we need to look at, and the opportunities sometimes are going to require further input from the town in respect to zoning. And that reminds me, Gordon Carr, I didn't recognize you earlier. You're not getting out of here without being recognized. With that, we currently have a request before CPC for $878,000 for funding. And you think about the number you just saw and what the average cost of a home in Hingham is, more than that. So we have a challenging task in town, one that we welcome, but it is a challenging one nevertheless. And we get everybody on board, everybody working together. We can not only maintain the affordable housing we have, but we can increase it in town as it is so desperately needed. So with that, unless Karen, does anybody else have anything else that they'd like to offer at this point? Then what I would suggest we do is adjourn to our Affordable Housing Trust monthly meeting, and we will be discussing a number of different items. But before we do that, we'll take a couple of minutes to see if folks want to have some of the snacks that Emily was so good to go out and get. Emily and Karen? Oh. Yep, okay.
So as Tim and Karen both mentioned, we're really interested to hear your thoughts. So for those of you here tonight or anybody watching this later through Harbor Media on YouTube, we have an email address that's set up specifically for this project. It's housingplan@hingham-ma.gov, and we'd be very happy to hear from you. So again, it's housingplan@hingham-ma.gov. Thank you.
Just the timing from here.
Good question. So we're quite hopeful, again, that we'll be able to finalize the draft plan within the next few weeks, hopefully by the end of the year, get that up online, and then we'll provide for a comment period before really finalizing the remaining details.
Yeah, there was some discussion about being able to schedule a joint meeting of the Planning Board and the Housing Trust, which we need to see if that's even remotely possible. And then we're out, once we have a draft to kind of present it further and get some additional comments.